Ambassador Vorath had visited more than 300 worlds in his long career. He had walked on planets made of crystal. He had breathed the purple air of gas giants through specialized masks. He had negotiated with species that communicated through colors, through sounds humans could not hear, through chemicals released into the air. In all his years serving the Galactic Council, he had never failed to understand a species within the first few days of contact. Earth was supposed to be simple. The Council had detected radio signals coming from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. The signals were primitive, barely a century old, filled with entertainment broadcasts and military communications that the translation systems easily decoded. Initial scans showed a species of bipedal mammals with moderate intelligence and technology roughly equivalent to what most civilizations achieved before they destroyed themselves or joined the galactic community. Vorath had volunteered for the mission because he was bored. After 2 centuries of diplomatic work, a primitive world seemed like a vacation. He would land, observe the creatures for a few weeks, write his assessment, and recommend either continued observation or early contact protocols. It was routine work, the kind given to junior ambassadors or, in his case, senior ones looking for an easy assignment before retirement. His ship entered Earth's atmosphere on a warm evening in the middle section of a continent the humans called North America. The vessel was small, designed for single-passenger diplomatic missions, and it made almost no sound as it descended through the clouds. Vorath had chosen a rural area far from the large population centers, following standard first contact procedures. There was no need to alarm the primitive beings with a dramatic arrival. The ship landed in a field of tall yellow plants that the humans apparently grew for food. Vorath checked his translation implant, confirmed that the local atmosphere was breathable for his species, and stepped out onto the alien soil. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Earth had a rich, organic scent that reminded him of the forest worlds in the outer rim. The air was thick with moisture and carried the sounds of small creatures chirping in the darkness. 2 moons would have made the night bright, but Earth had only one, and it cast pale silver light across the field. Vorath stood beside his ship and waited. His training told him to observe before making contact, to understand the local customs before revealing himself. But he had barely taken 10 steps when lights appeared in the distance. A primitive ground vehicle was approaching, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Vorath considered returning to his ship, but curiosity kept him still. He wanted to see how these humans would react to an alien presence. The vehicle stopped at the edge of the field. 2 figures climbed out and walked toward him, carrying handheld light sources. As they got closer, Vorath could see them clearly. They were a male and female of the species, both middle-aged by human standards, wearing simple clothing covered in dirt and plant matter. The male spoke first. His words came through Vorath's translator as, "Linda, are you seeing what I am seeing?" The female, Linda, nodded slowly. Her eyes were wide, but Vorath detected no panic in her body language. She seemed more curious than afraid. "Hello," Vorath said, letting his translator convert his words into their language. "I am Ambassador Vorath of the Galactic Council. I come in peace to study your world." The 2 humans looked at each other. Then the male did something Vorath did not expect. He laughed. "Well," the man said, "I always told Linda that if aliens ever showed up, they would land in someone's cornfield in Kansas. She said I watched too many movies. Looks like I was right." He stepped forward and extended his hand. Vorath had studied human customs enough to know this was a greeting gesture. He reached out with his own 4-fingered hand and allowed the human to shake it. "Name is Greg Patterson," the man said. "This is my wife Linda. You picked a good spot to land. Nearest neighbors are 3 miles away, and they go to bed early." Vorath did not know how to respond. In his experience, primitive species reacted to first contact with fear, aggression, or worship. The Pattersons seemed to be experiencing none of these emotions. They looked at him the way they might look at an unexpected guest who had arrived for dinner. "You must be hungry," Linda said. "Or tired. Or whatever your people get after a long trip. Why do you not come inside?" I have leftover pot roast. And Greg makes decent coffee. I do not wish to impose, Vorath said carefully. My mission is simply to observe your species and report back to the council. Greg shrugged. You can observe us over dinner. It is getting cold out here. And standing in a cornfield at night is no way to learn about humans. Vorath followed them to their home, a modest structure made of wood and stone. Inside, it was warm and filled with strange, but not unpleasant smells. The walls were covered with images of the Patterson family at various stages of their lives. Vorath studied them with interest, noting the ceremonies, the gatherings, the small moments captured and preserved. Linda heated food for him while Greg asked questions. Where was he from? How long had the journey taken? Were there other aliens? What did the Galactic Council do? Vorath answered carefully, trying to gauge their reactions, but the Pattersons simply nodded and asked more questions. They showed no fear of the answers. A small human appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. She was a child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with tangled hair and a sleepy expression. Katie, Linda said gently, go back to bed. You have school tomorrow. But Katie had seen Vorath. Instead of screaming or running, she walked closer and stared up at him with wide eyes. Are you an alien? She asked. Yes, Vorath replied. Cool, Katie said. She climbed onto a chair beside him and propped her chin on her hands. Do you have a spaceship? Yes, it is in your field. Can I see it tomorrow? Katie, Greg said with a tired smile. Let the ambassador eat his dinner. It is acceptable, Vorath said. I do not mind questions. Katie asked him many questions. She wanted to know if he had a family, if he had pets, if his planet had schools, if he liked ice cream. Vorath answered each one, growing more confused with every passing minute. This child had encountered a being from another world, and her primary concern was whether he enjoyed frozen desserts. Linda gave Katie a bowl of something sweet, and the child ate it while continuing her interrogation. Eventually, her questions slowed. Her eyes grew heavy, and Greg carried her back to bed. She is not afraid, Vorath observed when Greg returned. Why would she be? Greg asked. You have not given her any reason to be afraid. I am an unknown creature from beyond your world. Most species would consider that threatening. Linda set a cup of hot liquid in front of him. Mr. Vorath, we have had a strange life on this planet. We have survived tornadoes, droughts, and a recession that nearly took our farm. We have learned that fear does not help much. If something is going to hurt you, being afraid will not stop it. And if it is not going to hurt you, then fear just wastes your time. Vorath sipped the coffee. It was bitter but not unpleasant. He stayed with the Patterson family for 3 days. He helped Greg repair a fence. He watched Linda tend to her garden. He let Katie show him her drawings and her collection of rocks. He ate meals with them, listened to their stories, and observed their daily routines. On the 4th day, representatives from the human government arrived to take him to their capital for formal contact procedures. As Vorath boarded their vehicle, Katie ran out of the house and handed him a piece of paper. It was a drawing of his ship, rendered in bright colors with childish skill. She had written his name at the bottom, spelled incorrectly, with a small heart beside it. So you do not forget us, Katie said. Vorath looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then he folded it carefully and placed it inside his diplomatic pouch. I will not forget, he said. As the vehicle drove away, Vorath looked back at the small farmhouse growing smaller in the distance. He had visited hundreds of worlds, met thousands of species, and he had never encountered anything quite like the Pattersons. He made a note in his preliminary report. Humans appear hospitable and curious. No immediate signs of threat. Recommend further observation. He had no idea how wrong his initial assessment would prove to be. The human government brought Vorath to a large building in a city they called New York. It was one of their major population centers, home to millions of beings packed into towers of glass and steel. Vorath had seen crowded cities before, but something about New York felt different. The humans moved with a speed and purpose that surprised him. They walked quickly, talked quickly, and seemed to carry the weight of urgent business even when they were simply buying food from street vendors. His official liaison was a woman named Danielle Morton. She was tall for a human female, with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes that missed nothing. She worked for an organization called the United Nations, which apparently served as a meeting place for Earth's many separate governments. "Your planet has multiple governments?" Vorath asked, when she explained this. "Nearly 200, Danielle said. "We have not figured out how to agree on everything yet. How do you avoid constant war?" Danielle paused before answering. "We do not always avoid it." She had been assigned to show Vorath the reality of human civilization. The council wanted a complete assessment, and Danielle's job was to make sure he saw everything, not just the pleasant parts. She took her job seriously. Their first stop was a museum dedicated to human history. Vorath walked through halls filled with objects from different eras, each room representing a different period of development. He saw stone tools and bronze weapons. He saw armor worn by warriors from civilizations long dead. He saw swords and spears and shields, each designed with careful attention to the art of killing. "Your species has always fought," Vorath observed. "Yes," Danielle said simply. "It is part of who we are." They moved into more recent history. Vorath saw uniforms from what humans called the First World War. Danielle explained that this conflict had killed roughly 17 million people in just 4 years. Vorath stopped walking. 17 million? He repeated. "That was considered shocking at the time," Danielle said. "It was called the War to End All Wars. People believed that after experiencing such horror, humanity would never fight again. And were they correct? No. 20 years later, we had the Second World War. That one killed between 70 and 85 million people." Ah! Vorath felt something cold settle in his chest. His own species, the Veln, had experienced exactly one major war in their entire history. It had lasted 12 years and claimed approximately 1.8 million lives. That conflict had traumatized the Veln so deeply that they had restructured their entire society to prevent it from ever happening again. The idea of losing 17 million people and then fighting an even larger war 2 decades later was beyond his comprehension. Danielle showed him photographs from these conflicts. He saw trenches filled with mud and bodies. He saw cities reduced to rubble. He saw the hollow eyes of prisoners in camps designed for systematic killing. She explained words like genocide and Holocaust and ethnic cleansing with the calm voice of someone who had grown up knowing these things. "How do you know this and remain sane?" Vorath asked. "We learn about it in school," Danielle said. "Most humans know these stories from childhood. We believe that if we remember the horrors, we will be less likely to repeat them." "Has that worked?" Danielle did not answer. Instead, she led him to a different section of the museum. Here, Vorath learned about conflicts he had never heard of. He learned about wars in Korea and Vietnam, where millions more died. He learned about genocides in Cambodia and Rwanda, where humans slaughtered their own neighbors with machetes and bullets. He learned about civil wars in dozens of countries, about terrorism and counterterrorism, about conflicts that had been burning for generations with no end in sight. The numbers piled up in Vorath's mind until they lost all meaning. 10,000 dead here, 500,000 there, 2 million in this country, 800,000 in that one. Each number represented individual beings, each with their own hopes and fears and families. And the humans had simply ended them by the millions. In the 20th century alone, Danielle said, approximately 180 million humans died from war and related violence. Vorath sat down on a bench. His legs no longer wanted to support him. "This cannot be correct," he said. "No species could sustain such losses and survive." "We are still here," Danielle said. "Our population is over 8 billion. How? We reproduce quickly, and we rebuild even more quickly. Every time we tear something down, we build it back. Sometimes better, sometimes worse, but always we build. Every time we build, every time we build." She gave him a few minutes to compose himself, then continued the tour. They visited a memorial to a war called Vietnam. Vorath read the names carved into a long black wall, name after name after name, and Danielle explained that this monument honored only the American dead, only those from one country in a conflict that killed millions. They visited a museum in Washington dedicated to something called the Holocaust. Vorath walked through rooms filled with shoes taken from the dead, with photographs of children who did not survive, with documentation of a systematic effort to erase entire groups of people from existence. The humans had built factories specifically designed to kill other humans as efficiently as possible. Why? Vorath whispered. Why would any being do this to their own kind? Fear, Danielle said. Hatred. The belief that some humans are worth less than others. We have never fully eliminated these feelings from our species, but you know it is wrong. You have museums dedicated to remembering the evil. Knowing something is wrong does not always stop us from doing it. We are a complicated species, Ambassador. That evening, Vorath returned to his quarters in the United Nations building. He sat alone in the darkness and tried to process what he had learned. His preliminary report had described humans as hospitable and curious. He had watched a little girl draw pictures of his spaceship with crayons. He had eaten dinner with a family who treated him like a welcomed guest, and these same beings had killed 180 million of their own kind in a single century. Vorath opened his communication device and sent a message to the Council. Initial assessment requires significant revision. Species is far more complex than preliminary data suggested. Request extended observation period. The Council approved his request immediately. Over the following days, Danielle took him to more locations. She showed him Hiroshima, where a single bomb had killed over 100,000 people in an instant. She explained that the humans had built weapons capable of destroying their entire civilization, and that these weapons still existed, still aimed at cities, still ready to fire. You have created instruments of your own extinction, Vorath said. And you have not destroyed them? No. We keep them as a deterrent. The idea is that no one will start a nuclear war, because everyone knows it would mean the end of everything. And you trust this logic? We have so far. It has been almost 80 years since the last nuclear weapon was used in war. And if someone makes a mistake, if someone pushes the wrong button, Danielle looked at him with steady eyes. Then we die. All of us. We have lived with that possibility for 3 generations. Vorath did not sleep that night. He lay in his quarters and stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how any species could exist under such conditions. The Veln had gone to extreme lengths to prevent even small-scale conflicts. They had restructured their government, their economy, their entire way of life to ensure peace. The idea of building weapons that could end their civilization and then simply continuing to live normal lives was madness. Yet the humans had done exactly that. They had invented the means of their own destruction, and then continued raising families, building cities, creating art, and dreaming of the future. They knew the bombs could fall at any moment, and they got up every morning anyway. Vorath began to realize that he was not dealing with a primitive species. He was dealing with something entirely different, something the Galactic Council had never encountered before. He was dealing with a species that had looked into the possibility of its own extinction and simply refused to be afraid. His next report to the Council was longer and more uncertain. He described what he had learned about human history, about their wars and weapons, about their capacity for both creation and destruction. He concluded with a question he could not answer. How does a species survive when they are their own greatest threat? The Council sent back a simple response. Continue observation. We await your final assessment. Vorath agreed to continue, but he was no longer certain that he would ever understand these strange, violent, endlessly complicated beings. He was no longer certain he wanted to. Vorath requested to meet individual humans. He had seen the museums and the memorials. He had learned the numbers and the dates, but statistics could not explain how a species survived what humanity had survived. He needed to look into their eyes and understand how they carried such weight. Danielle arranged the meetings. She seemed to understand what he needed, though she warned him that the conversations might be difficult. Difficult for whom? Vorath asked. For you, she said. The first person he met was a man named Marcus Green. Marcus lived in a city called Chicago. in a small apartment filled with photographs and military decorations. He was in his middle years, with gray at his temples and scars on his hands that he did not explain. He had served as a soldier in 3 separate wars over 15 years. Vorath sat across from him at a small table and asked his questions carefully. Marcus answered in a calm, flat voice that carried no emotion. "The first time I saw combat, I was 19 years old," Marcus said. "We were in a country I had never heard of before the military sent me there. By the end of my first week, I had watched 2 of my friends die. One of them was next to me when it happened. I felt his blood on my face." "How did you continue?" Vorath asked. "I did not have a choice. There were other soldiers depending on me. If I stopped, more people would die. So I kept moving, kept fighting, kept doing my job. And afterward? When the fighting was over?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "The fighting is never over. Not really. I have been home for 8 years, and I still wake up at 3 in the morning thinking I hear explosions. I still check every room when I enter a building. I still cannot sit with my back to a door. This sounds like profound psychological damage. The doctors call it post-traumatic stress. A lot of soldiers have it. We go to therapy, take medication, try to live normal lives. Some of us manage better than others." Vorath leaned forward. "Why did you agree to fight? You must have known the risks." "I wanted to protect people." "That sounds simple, maybe stupid, but it is true. I believed I could make a difference. Keep innocent people safe. I still believe that. Even after everything I saw, and if you could go back, would you make the same choice?" Marcus looked at the photographs on his wall. One showed a young girl with his same eyes, smiling at the camera. "I have a daughter now," he said. "She is 12. Sometimes she asks me about the war, and I do not know what to tell her. But yes, I would do it again, because someone has to stand between the darkness and the people who cannot protect themselves. Someone has to be willing to carry that weight." Vorath thanked Marcus and left Chicago with more questions than answers. His next meeting was in Houston, at a large medical facility. Dr. Patricia Vance met him in a quiet office filled with books and certificates. She was a small woman with tired eyes and hands that never stopped moving. "I have worked disaster relief for 22 years, she said. "Earthquakes, tsunamis, famines, epidemics. I have seen things that most people cannot imagine." "Tell me," Vorath said. Patricia described her work in clinical terms at first. She talked about treating hundreds of patients in impossible conditions, about performing surgery with inadequate supplies, about making decisions that meant some people would live and others would die. Then her voice changed, became quieter. "There was a girl," she said. "After an earthquake in Central America. She was trapped under rubble for 3 days before we found her. Both her legs were crushed. There was nothing we could do except try to keep her comfortable. What happened? I sat with her for 6 hours while she died. She was 11 years old. She kept asking for her mother, and I had to tell her that her mother was gone too. She held my hand until the end." Patricia's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She had learned to control that long ago. "After she died, I stood up and walked to the next patient. I worked for another 16 hours before I allowed myself to stop. There were too many people who needed help. I could not afford to grieve." "How do you bear this?" Vorath asked. "I do not know. You learn to separate yourself from it somehow. You build walls inside your mind. And you keep going because the alternative is to stop, and stopping means more people die. Do you regret your choice of profession?" Patricia almost smiled. "Every day. And every day I go back to work anyway. Because I can help. Even when I cannot save everyone, I can save someone. That has to be enough." Vorath's third meeting was in New York, with a woman named Heather Cole. She lived in a comfortable apartment, with large windows overlooking the city. She had rebuilt her life after losing everything. "I was in one of the towers," Heather said. "September 11th, 2001. You might not know what that means. Danielle explained it to me. A terrorist attack. Yes, I worked on the 78th floor. When the plane hit, I thought the world was ending. There was fire and smoke and people screaming. I managed to get to a stairwell. But my husband did not make it. She spoke calmly, but Vorath could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the armrest of her chair. I spent 2 years unable to function, Heather continued. I could not work, could not sleep, could barely eat. I thought about ending my life more than once. The only thing that stopped me was the thought that my husband would have been so disappointed. How did you recover? Slowly. With help. Therapy, medication, the support of friends and family. Eventually, I realized that surviving was not enough. I had to do something with the time I had been given. She gestured at the room around her. Now, I work with other survivors. People who have lost loved ones to violence, to accidents, to illness. I help them understand that survival is not a betrayal of the dead. It is a tribute to them. Vorath considered her words. You believe that living is a way of honoring those who did not survive? I believe it is our responsibility. The dead cannot speak for themselves anymore. We have to speak for them, live for them, carry their memory forward. That is how we keep them alive. Over the following week, Vorath met more humans. He spoke with refugees who had fled wars and rebuilt their lives in new countries. He met survivors of natural disasters, who had lost everything and started over. He talked with people who had overcome illness, addiction, poverty, and abuse to create meaningful lives. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. Each person described horrors that would have destroyed members of most species. Each person had found a way to continue, to heal, to move forward. None of them claimed to be undamaged. They all carried scars, visible and invisible. But they carried them while still functioning, still contributing, still hoping. Vorath began to see a pattern emerging. Humans did not survive because they were immune to trauma. They survived because they had developed an extraordinary ability to absorb damage and continue operating. They compartmentalized their pain, built support systems for each other, and chose to find meaning even in suffering. It was not resilience in the way Vorath understood the word. It was something harder and stranger. It was the refusal to stop existing even when existence had become unbearable. On the last day of his interviews, Vorath asked Danielle a question that had been building in his mind. Does your species have a word for this quality? This ability to endure what should be unendurable? Danielle thought for a moment. We have many words: strength, courage, perseverance. But I think the best word might be spite. Spite? Yes. Sometimes we survive simply because we refuse to give the universe the satisfaction of defeating us. We keep going not because we believe we will win, but because we refuse to quit. It is not always noble or beautiful. Sometimes it is just stubborn anger at a world that tries to break us. Vorath added this to his notes. He was beginning to understand that humanity was not a species to be pitied or feared. They were a species to be watched very carefully, because a being that could survive anything was a being that could accomplish anything, and Vorath was no longer certain the galaxy was ready for that. Danielle told Vorath that there was one more person he needed to meet. She did not explain why, only that it was important. They traveled by aircraft to a mountainous region in the western part of North America, to a facility built deep inside a mountain. This is called NORAD, Danielle said, as they passed through multiple security checkpoints. It was built to survive a nuclear war. For decades, the people inside these walls monitored the skies for incoming missiles. They were the first line of defense against the end of the world. Vorath looked at the massive blast doors, the reinforced walls, the equipment designed to function even after civilization collapsed above them. Your species built all this, he said. Because you believed your enemies might try to destroy everything. We built this because we were certain they would try. And we wanted someone to survive if they did. The man they were there to meet was waiting in a small office filled with old photographs and military honors. His name was Samuel Price. He was old now, his hair white and his movements slow, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He had been a general once, commanding the forces that controlled America's nuclear weapons. Ambassador Vorath, Samuel said, gesturing to a chair. I have been waiting for someone like you for a long time. You expected contact with other species? I hoped for it, and feared it. Samuel poured 2 glasses of a brown liquid that Vorath recognized as whiskey. Danielle tells me you want to understand humanity. She thinks I can help with that. I have learned much already, Vorath said. I have seen your history, spoken with your survivors. I understand that your species has endured great suffering we inflicted on ourselves, mostly. Samuel took a drink and set the glass down carefully. I commanded nuclear weapons for 32 years. Do you understand what that means? I believe so. You controlled the devices capable of destroying your civilization. More than that, I trained to use them. I ran simulations where I gave the order to launch missiles at cities filled with millions of innocent people, children, grandparents, families sitting down to dinner. I practiced killing them all, over and over, so that if the moment came, I would not hesitate. Vorath felt a chill spread through his body. You were prepared to commit genocide. I was prepared to end my species if it became necessary. That was my job. That was the job of thousands of people like me, on both sides of the conflict. The Cold War, Vorath said. Danielle explained it to me. Then she explained that for nearly 50 years, 2 groups of humans pointed enough weapons at each other to destroy all life on the planet many times over. The only thing preventing annihilation was the knowledge that any attack would be met with immediate retaliation, mutual assured destruction. We had a charming acronym for it. MAD. This is madness by any definition. Samuel laughed, a dry sound with no humor in it. Yes. That was rather the point. The doctrine only works if both sides believe the other is willing to go through with it. So, we had to be willing. We had to mean it. And you did mean it. I did. I spent decades prepared to give an order that would have killed hundreds of millions of people. I went home every night to my wife and children, knowing that tomorrow I might be responsible for ending everything they loved. I watched them grow up, celebrated birthdays and holidays, and carried that weight the entire time. Vorath struggled to process this. How did you function? How did any of you function? Because we had to. Because the alternative was to let our guard down and risk being destroyed first. So we learned to live with the impossible. We raised families under the shadow of extinction. We went to baseball games and cooked barbecues and argued about politics, all while knowing that at any moment, the sky could fill with fire. Samuel leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Vorath's. That is what I need you to understand, Ambassador. We did not simply survive the threat of nuclear war. We lived full lives during it. We fell in love, raised children, created art, built businesses. We did all the normal things that normal beings do. And we did them while holding the knowledge that tomorrow might be the last day of human civilization. I do not understand how that is possible. Neither do we, really. But we did it. For generations. The people working in this facility, they were not robots or fanatics. They were ordinary humans. With ordinary hopes and fears, they wanted what everyone wants: peace, happiness, a good life for their children. And they came to work every day ready to end the world if necessary. Vorath stood and walked to the window. Outside, the mountain stretched upward, beautiful and indifferent to the horrors that had been planned within its depths. You came here thinking we were children playing with fire, Samuel said behind him. Most species who develop nuclear technology either destroy themselves or immediately disarm. We did neither. We built more weapons, pointed them at each other, and just kept living. Why did you not destroy yourselves? I have thought about that question for 50 years. I think it is because we are too stubborn to die. We look at oblivion, and we refuse to blink first. Even when logic says we should run, something in us plants its feet and says no. That is not rational behavior. No, it is not. But it has kept us alive so far. Vorath turned back to face the old general. The weapons still exist. Danielle told me that thousands of nuclear devices remain ready to launch. Yes, the Cold War ended, but the bombs did not disappear. Several nations possess them now. The threat has changed shape, but it has not gone away. Every day, someone somewhere has their finger near a button that could end everything. And you continue to live with this. We do. We get up every morning, drink our coffee, go to work, love our families, and somewhere in the back of every human mind is the knowledge that it could all end in 30 minutes if the wrong person makes the wrong decision. Samuel finished his whiskey and set the glass aside. You asked me how humanity survives. I will tell you the truth. We survive because we choose to. Every day, every moment, we choose to keep going despite knowing what we are capable of doing to each other. We have seen the worst of ourselves, and we refuse to let it define us. He smiled, and there was something ancient and terrible in his expression. That is what humanity is, Ambassador. We are not innocent. We are not noble. We are creatures who have looked into the abyss and seen our own reflections staring back, and we decided that even knowing what we are, even knowing what we might become, we will keep fighting for something better. What if you fail? Then we fail. Then we destroy ourselves and prove that we were never worthy of survival. But we will not stop trying. We cannot stop trying. It is not in our nature. Vorath left the facility as the sun was setting over the mountains. He walked in silence, turning Samuel's words over in his mind. He had spent his career studying species, evaluating their potential, predicting their futures. He had always been confident in his assessments. Now he understood that humanity defied assessment. They were not a species that could be measured by standard metrics. They were something new, something unprecedented, something that had looked at the possibility of extinction and simply refused to acknowledge it as a valid outcome. They were terrifying, and they did not even realize it. When Vorath returned to his quarters that night, he did not sleep. He sat in the darkness and thought about the little girl who had drawn pictures of his spaceship, about the soldier who woke up screaming but kept living, about the old general who had spent decades ready to end the world. He thought about a species that had invented weapons capable of destroying everything, and then just continued existing, day after day, choice after choice, refusing to surrender to the darkness inside themselves. And for the first time in his long career, Ambassador Vorath was afraid, not of what humanity might do to the galaxy, but of what would happen if the galaxy gave them a reason to demonstrate what they were truly capable of. Vorath's ship departed Earth 32 standard days after his arrival. He watched the blue planet grow smaller through his viewport, that tiny sphere of water and rock that had changed everything he thought he knew about life in the universe. Part of him wanted to stay longer, to learn more, to understand these impossible beings better. But a larger part of him needed distance from what he had discovered. The journey back to the Council homeworld took 3 weeks. Vorath spent most of that time trying to write his report. He would start a paragraph, delete it, start again. How could he explain to the Council what he had witnessed? How could he convey in official language what it meant to meet a species that had tortured itself for 10,000 years and refused to stop existing? He looked at the drawing Katie Patterson had given him. It was still in his diplomatic pouch, carefully preserved. A simple sketch of his spaceship rendered in childish colors. She had drawn herself next to it, waving. She had written Ambassador Vorath at the bottom with letters that slanted in different directions. This same species that produced drawings and kindness had also produced trenches filled with bodies and weapons capable of ending all life. Vorath did not understand how both could exist in the same beings. When he arrived at the council chamber, the representatives of 900 species were waiting for him. It was the largest gathering in recent memory. Word had spread that the primitive world called Earth had proven more complex than anticipated. Everyone wanted to hear what the senior ambassador had discovered. Councillor Yendrath, the eldest member of the assembly, called the session to order. Yendrath was ancient even by the standards of long-lived species, and he had witnessed the rise and fall of hundreds of civilizations. His wisdom was respected throughout the galaxy. Ambassador Vorath, Yendrath said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. You were sent to evaluate the humans of Earth. We have received your preliminary reports, but we require your final assessment. Is this species a threat to the galactic community? Vorath stepped forward to the speaking platform. He looked out at the assembled representatives. Some were eager. curious about the strange mammals from the far spiral arm. Others were bored, expecting another routine evaluation of another primitive world. None of them understood what was coming. He opened his mouth to speak. No words came. The silence stretched on. Representatives began to shift in their seats. Yendrath leaned forward with concern. "Ambassador, are you unwell?" Vorath tried again. His voice emerged as a whisper at first, barely audible even with the chamber's amplification systems. "I have studied more than 300 species," he said. "I have seen civilizations that span star systems. I have negotiated with empires that have existed for millions of years. I believed I understood what intelligent life could become." He paused, gathering himself. "I was wrong." The chamber grew very quiet. "Humanity is a species that has experienced more collective trauma than any civilization in our records," Vorath continued. "They have invented weapons capable of rendering their world uninhabitable. They have committed atrocities against their own kind that defy comprehension. They have fought wars that killed tens of millions. They have built death camps and torture chambers. They have done things to each other that no other species in our database has ever done." A murmur spread through the assembly. Representatives exchanged concerned glances. This was not a typical evaluation, and none of it has stopped them. Vorath's voice cracked. He did not try to hide it. They did not retreat into despair. They did not fragment into permanent conflict. They did not destroy themselves, though they came close many times. Instead, they endured. They adapted. They buried their dead and continued building. They created art and music and literature. They fell in love and raised children. They kept reaching for the stars even as they mourned what they had done to each other. He looked down at his notes, then set them aside. They were useless now. "I met a soldier who had watched his friends die and still found reasons to keep living. I met a doctor who held a dying child's hand and then worked another 16 hours saving others. I met a general who spent decades prepared to end his species and somehow remained sane. I met a little girl who drew me pictures and asked if I liked ice cream." His voice strengthened as he spoke, carrying emotion he could not suppress. "They are not a primitive species. They are the most resilient, most stubborn, most indomitable form of life I have ever encountered. Every tragedy that would have destroyed another civilization has only made them stronger. Every horror they have inflicted upon themselves has taught them new ways to survive." The chamber was absolutely silent now. 900 species held their breath. "They live under the constant shadow of their own extinction," Vorath said. "They know that at any moment, someone could push a button and end everything. And they get up every morning anyway. They go to work. They raise families. They dream of the future. They choose to keep living despite knowing exactly what they are capable of doing to themselves." He looked at Counselor Yendrath with something close to desperation. "Do you understand what that means? They have looked into the darkest parts of their own nature. They have seen what they can become, and they have decided, every single day for generations, to be something better instead." Vorath took a breath that shook his entire body. "My recommendation is that we do not contact humanity again. We do not threaten them. We do not interfere with them in any way. We watch them from a distance and hope they never have a reason to notice us." A representative from one of the military species spoke up. "Are you suggesting we fear them? They are technologically primitive. They have not even achieved faster than light travel." "They will," Vorath said flatly. "Give them time. They went from wooden sailing ships to nuclear weapons in 3 centuries. They went from riding animals to landing on their moon in 60 years. When they reach the stars, and they will reach the stars, they will bring with them everything they have learned about survival. But surely we could contain them if necessary," another representative said. "Our combined forces would overwhelm any resistance." Vorath laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "Contain them? You want to give them an enemy to unite against? You want to threaten a species that has survived everything it has done to itself?" He shook his head slowly. "If we become their enemy, they will not stop. They will never stop. They will come for us with the same relentless fury they have turned upon themselves for 10,000 years. They will sacrifice millions of their own people, if that is what victory requires. They will fight until every last one of them is dead, and even then, they will try to take us with them. He stepped back from the platform. I have met humans who survived horrors that would have broken any of us. I have looked into their eyes and seen something that exists in no other species. They call it many things. Determination, stubbornness, spite. But I have a better word for it. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Inevitability. That is what I see in human eyes. The absolute certainty that no matter what happens, no matter how much pain they must endure, they will keep going. They will keep fighting. They will keep surviving. Until they win, or until there is nothing left to survive. Vorath bowed to the council. That concludes my report. The vote took less than an hour. 900 species agreed unanimously to classify Earth as a protected system. No contact would be attempted. No interference would be permitted. Humanity would be allowed to develop at their own pace, watched from a careful distance. Some called it wisdom. Others called it cowardice. Vorath knew it was simply survival instinct. After the session ended, Counselor Yendrath approached him privately. "You are frightened," the ancient being observed. "Yes," Vorath admitted. "Not of what they might do, but of what they represent." Vorath looked at the old counselor with tired eyes. They prove that survival does not require harmony, or peace, or even sanity. They prove that a species can tear itself apart for thousands of years and still reach for the stars. They prove that all our careful systems, all our carefully balanced civilizations, might not be the only way. And that frightens you. It should frighten everyone. Vorath returned to his homeworld and submitted his resignation. He had served the council for 2 centuries, and he had nothing left to give. The humans had taken something from him. Some fundamental certainty about how the universe worked, and he did not know how to get it back. He settled in a small dwelling far from the capital and lived quietly for many years. He kept Katie Patterson's drawing on his wall. Sometimes he looked at it and remembered the little girl who had asked if he liked ice cream. He wondered what she would become, what all of them would become, and in his private moments, Ambassador Vorath admitted something he would never say aloud. He was not afraid of humanity. He was in awe of them, because they had found something no other species had ever found. They had discovered how to look into the void, see all the reasons they should give up, and choose to keep going anyway, not because they believed they would succeed, but because they refused to accept any other option, and that, Vorath knew, was the most terrifying thing in the universe. Far away, on a small blue planet, humanity continued its march toward the stars. They had no idea they were being watched. They had no idea that 900 species were afraid of what they might become. They simply did what they had always done. They survived. And they reached upward, toward a future they could not see but refused to stop believing in. Because that is what humans do. That is all they have ever done. And it is enough to make the galaxy tremble.